All right. It looks like we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. And today we have a super guest author who is looking very snazzy in a very cool looking room. I'm sure that was all intentional. Marshall Ryan Maresca is here to talk about his latest book, which is an import of Intrigue. And Marshall, if I'm correct, this is not the first book that you've written in this world.
That is correct. It is the fourth in the world and the second in the series. So I have two series that are running at the same time. Both of them have 2 books out so far. And then there's a third series. The first book of the third series will be coming out in March. So, but they're all set in the same world. So it's.
And so the name of the world is Maradaine?
Maradaine, that's what we've been calling it. Maradaine, that's the city that it's all set in. So
okay. So tell us a bit about Maradaine.
Maradaine is a large metropolis of a fantasy world where it is the capital and the largest city in the country, and the country's called Druthel. And it is.
Can you write that in the chat bar so I can actually see?
Sure. I can do it. It helps if I don't hit the thing that makes my screen vanish. Okay.
Oops.
Sorry, I know I'm confusing things, but I like to be able to sort of understand what you're saying. Druthel, okay. I was like, what was that word? Just seeing it written down helps a lot. Okay.
So,
all right, keep going.
It is the capital of a country called Druthel, and Druthel is a parliamentary monarchy. So when I was putting it, designing it, it's like I didn't want to just take like a British Western European copy and paste of a monarchy and nobility. So I decided to add in not exactly something American, but the idea that they've instituted democracy on top of their monarchy. So it's a parliamentary monarchy, and they have elections and they have parliamentary representation, even though it's it's still flawed.
Yeah, well, as we know, ours is flawed too. So,
but so I wanted to, even though I have that, I wanted to show this world from a more street level perspective. So all 3 series focus on the I wouldn't say the regular residents, but people on the ground level. So the first series, which is the Thorn of Denton Hill and The Alchemy of Chaos. I'm going to hold my books now, which are these 2. You'll see them in reverse because that's how cameras look.
It's actually just how you look to yourself. We can see them regularly.
Oh, excellent. That's good to know. I'm like, well, we're showing backwards. But anyway, so those involve a magic student by day, street vigilante by night, who's waging a one-man war against a drug lord. And then the other series that's out already, which is the Maradaine Constabulary series, which is Murder of Mages, and the just released An Import of Intrigue. And those involve 2 constabulary inspectors who have to deal with magical and mystical murders, amongst many other things. So it's very much keeping that street level perspective of this grand magical city filled with intrigue and corruption and all that fun stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what makes the magic happen? Like, what kind of a magic system are you working with?
The magic system in this world is, some people are just born with magic. It's not, they've never quite worked out the rules of who gets it, who doesn't. But it's, some people are born with it, and usually when they hit around the age of 13 or so, it manifests, and just the raw ability. And then usually they would then need to be trained how to use it well. And that's actually an important part, that most people who have the ability are then pretty much pressed into, like, you need to go to the university or you need some other form of training. And then once you get that formal training, then you're going to be joining a circle, which is sort of a legal entity of mages. So it protects them legally and protects them because they have a group of people who have their back.
Yeah.
And not going through that training and not having that legal protection basically just puts a target on your back.
Oh, okay. For whom?
For whoever, if you are an uncircled mage, then other mages will treat you like a pariah. And in general, the culture of Maradaine, they're still very suspicious of magic. 200 years before, people, they would be regularly burning mages at the stake or hanging them or lynching.
Oh, okay.
And the legal rules of like, hey, let's not do that. Let's learn what magic is, and have been slowly integrating into society. But there's still plenty of people who it's something that scares them, and they.
Yeah, well, yeah, I could see why. I'm noticing that in Import of Intrigue, you've got one character who seems to be a mage and another character who seems to be not one. Am I right?
That's correct. The two main characters. So that ties directly into the characters of the constabulary. One of the two main characters, who is Minox, he is an uncircled mage because his magic ability didn't manifest until he was an adult. He already was in the constabulary when that happened. And if you train her with the circle, there's certain jobs that they were like, no, you're not gonna be a cop and basically work against our interests. So you can't be a circled mage and be in the constabulary. So basically, he had to make a choice to stay untrained and hope that just being in the constabulary would be enough to protect him from.
Wow.
But I think that's interesting because, in fact, probably magic would be like an asset to the constabulary. I would think, but maybe that's something that the circled mages kind of avoid.
Well, the circled mages do not trust the constabulary.
Oh, okay.
Like because there's a lot of stuff in the laws that let the circles protect themselves, and they basically are of the mindset that if police come and ask questions, they will find some spurious excuse to lock you up, and
I see.
Like you'll get charged with disrupting the peace because you did something magical. And
makes sense.
Breathing water.
So does that mean Minox has to be very careful about his magic use, or what are the consequences for the story or for the character particularly?
He has to be very careful, in part because on some level he just doesn't know what he's doing. He's
Okay.
used magic in a raw, instinctive way, so things happen and he doesn't fully understand what he's doing or why. There's one part in the first book where he basically accidentally puts a magical trace on another person and is able to follow them, but he doesn't really understand that he did that.
Okay.
And because of that, he is kind of a bull in the china shop with his magic.
Yeah.
And therefore he's got to be careful because the other constabulary don't trust him. They call him Jinx in his station house because he's had terrible things happen around him. A former partner of his, he almost killed by just blasting his magic out. So the rest of his department doesn't really like him too much, except he's an excellent inspector. And then he gets partnered with Citrine, who is also an excellent inspector, but she's unconventional in other ways. And so they're the two people who nobody else likes in the department, but
okay.
but they get the job done.
So do they like each other?
They do like each other. They both have a lot of mutual respect for each other's ability and intelligence, and they get results, which is why their captain keeps them on.
And it seems that both of them get points of view.
Yes. Yeah, they are both points of view characters. In fact, Murder Mages in a way was one of the hardest things ever because I like to jump around with point of view all the time. I don't like I have no like set rules of like I'm it's only this character's point of view or anything like that. But with that one, I specifically only used the two of them in the first constabulary. I only used the two of them as viewpoint characters. And then with import, I opened that up to a couple of the other characters because. But I always see when I'm writing, I always see point of view as an element of trust with the reader. Like, you can have a villain be a point of view character at one point, but you have to be honest about what their villainy is.
Yeah.
And so if you want to set up the idea that there are characters you can't trust, like especially in a murder mystery kind of story, you can't then switch to the murderer and give it all away, or not be honest that you've switched to the murderer or that. So
I see. Well, I mean, if the person knows they're the murderer and the murderer is portrayed accurately, but it doesn't like gut the suspense or anything like that, you can do it.
True. But like in this case, I wanted to set up, especially in Murder Mages, I wanted to set up the idea that the two of them didn't know who they could trust at all, even in the department. So thus, switching to anybody else could undercut the tension.
Oh yeah, I understand that. And what do you think is the most is there sort of an ulterior motive for you in including both of those points of view? What do you think the switch between the 2 points of view does for the reader, and what was your intent in that department?
Mostly to show the two different perspectives of the story, and each of them has a rich outer life outside of their job. So I wanted to be able to go to both of those elements of outer life, and thus show how both of them are reacting to what's going on and what they have to deal with beyond just the case that they're investigating. So it was important to me that both of them got equal time of what's going on.
Okay, so did you now I noticed that you have maps at the front of this book.
Yes.
Did you design those yourself?
I did those myself. Yes. I don't so much get writer's block, but when I get moments where I need to sort of churn the ideas out, that's a thing I can do that's creative, that lets like the other parts of my brain think on things while I'm playing with making the map. So I have detailed maps of the city, I have maps of the country, I have maps of the whole world, I have a lot of maps.
Do you draw them yourself?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah.
I did those mostly with Photoshop. It's fine, because this world I first did the initial creations of over 20 years ago, and I've been constantly building on that and adding to it. So somewhere deep in the papers, I have the original hand-drawn world map that I then scanned and then made a digital version of, and like the digital versions I have now of the map would have made my original computer explode if I tried. Because I've kept now I can make it half a gig size file and keep that.
Things have gotten more complex.
They have gotten more complex as my ability to make it more complex and just the map level have improved and increased. So of course now I've reached the point where with the main world map file, like I said, it is half a gig, and it's now a Photoshop file with I don't even know how many layers in it. So it's reached the point where I do something and then I have to wait 5 minutes while it processes.
Oh, it's big.
That's frustrating. But I'm sure that happens. So one of the questions I had when I was looking at your maps was I guess what I'm mostly trying to do is sort of bring some of my observations into this discussion, because people can't easily go and look at your maps like right now, unless they want to sort of step out. So Maradaine is the city, and there's a river in it.
Yes.
Is it on an ocean? Is it a port city? What?
It's,
give us a little bit more of a sense of all the sort of different confluences there.
The river is going through it, and it's a large river, like the size of the Mississippi, and it's just short of the actual ocean. So when you get to the west end of it, you're starting to get, I'm blanking on the word, where
Delta?
not well. I mean, there is a delta there also, but it's the term for when the fresh water is meeting the salt water.
An estuary.
Estuary, that's the word.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's starting to become that point. So it's a port, but it's a very protected port because there's still some like islands and other stuff before reaching the open sea. So
Okay. So how does that influence the culture of the town?
well, for one, since it is a major port, there is plenty of there are plenty of people in the city from other parts of the world. A very cosmopolitan city, and so especially you were leading me into this, especially with an import of Intrigue, where the murder that they're investigating takes place in the neighborhood that has several different foreign enclaves in it of people from all over the world. So they have to navigate these foreign cultures that are right in their own backyard to be able to solve the murder.
And then you have sort of hinted to me in the past that there are linguistic groups here.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So, as just in the book itself, we focus on 5 different foreign cultures that they're dealing with, and for each area there is a fair amount of linguistic background work that I've done. The main language of the Druth culture is just called trade, because Druthel, I delving into all the historical background I did, was once part of a larger empire, which is the Kieran Empire. And so there is a strong linguistic tie between everything that was part of the Kieran Empire. And so they all speak sort of the same language, which is called trade. Now there's, since it's a huge area, there's been a small amount of linguistic drift, but it is the same base language for all of them. So, and the Kieran Empire still exists, but it is nowhere near the size that it once was, because all these other nations had a rebellion and broke free and created their own governments. So that's one of the 5 cultures that we focus on, is the Kieran Empire. So their language and the Druth language is it's English for all intents and purposes. Yeah. in the course of this book.
Trade is functionally English. I get it. That's a practical approach if you actually want to have people read your book.
Yes.
Right.
I wrote my fantasy novel entirely in the other language. By the dictionary and then by the book. So then there are basically 3 other linguistic bases that you see, because 2 of the other cultures are from the same part of the world, from the same continent, and so they started with the same initial base that then broke off. Now there's a lot more drift between their bases. I have a friend, one of my dearest oldest friends, who is he is studying linguistics at I'm forgetting the name of the school, at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. So he helps me with a lot of the deep background work, and I send him stuff that I'm doing, and he sends me. So we don't have like a full language for everything, but we have the base of it. We've formed, for each language group, we've put together the Phonemic Inventory, which is really the first step whenever you're doing any sort of language creation, is you have to determine what the sounds of the language are.
You guys know what that refers to? phonemic inventory?
Go ahead, tell.
Okay, so basically it's a list of all the possible sound concepts used by speakers of this language. And the reason why I call them sound concepts is because, like, for example, English has a sound concept of T, right? But T actually can sound different ways depending on where it occurs in different words. But we call those all T because we conceptualize them as the single sound, even though it takes a few different forms. That makes sense?
Yes.
So basically, like a phonemic inventory is all the sounds that I feel like I can make. Right?
And so, I mean, and I'm constantly like I've made sort of a hobby study of the International Phonetic Alphabet, which, I mean, there's parts of it where it's like, I don't know how anyone could make a sound like this, but there are these weird sounds that are native to some languages, and you have to and then once you have the phonemic inventory, you have to figure out how to express all those sounds in a consistent way in that language using using the English letters that we have.
Yeah.
That's always a bit of a challenge, because like sometimes I'm like, well, I want to avoid those cliches, just using apostrophes, whatever, forever, wherever, and
yeah.
a lot
But
of
I mean, to be fair, there's a difference between using apostrophes like pepper,
right,
and using apostrophes to indicate the presence of a glottal stop in your word, right? I mean, I suppose that if you were used to people using apostrophes like pepper, you might see a word that has a glottal stop in it and like back off because you were like, oh my gosh, apostrophes.
right.
But at the same time, there's no problem. I mean, like Hawaii, right, has an apostrophe in it that actually indicates a glottal stop. So it's Hawaii and not Hawaii.
Right.
Right.
Right. But there I have a lot of challenges in there where I'm like, because you don't want every language to look the same.
Right.
Especially in something like this where you have these different cultures that are just butting up against each other in the neighborhood, in the city. And you want to make sure when people see one word or another that they're able to quickly figure out exactly, like, oh, this is clearly from this culture and this is clearly from this culture. And that can also be a bit of a landmine because you'll come up with a consistent set of rules for one language. And because there are only so many sounds that a human mouth can make, some of that is going to read like a bastardized version of the language that we have in the world. And so people will look at it and be like, oh, this is just, something Vietnamese with the serial numbers filed off or something like that, just because there's some of the similar phonemic connections.
Yeah. Though, to be fair, one of the things you can do, I mean, you can have, take, for example, Spanish and Japanese. They share a lot of the same possible sounds.
Sure.
But the way they're organized is so different, and the frequency with which they appear and the syllable structure is different enough that you can really see the difference almost instantly if you're looking at a phrase in the language.
Right.
So I mean, I'm just trying to sort of bolster your point.
Right. And
for people who are listening, or for Che and Morgan, even if you have two languages that have nearly identical phonemic inventories, the distribution of those phonemes can be very, very different. And the rules by which they interact can be very, very different.
Right.
So.
And like, if you really want to dig deep, you can do what's called, I think it's called allophony. I could be wrong, but like those are the rules for when the rules are broken.
Mm-hmm.
And like adding that, like that vowel sounds will change if they're said after, like an ah can go to an ah if it's followed by a glottal sound, something like that. And you can, I mean, if you're really,
those are phonological rules, right?
Yes.
That you change a sound in a particular word context or a sound context. Yeah. Yep.
And I fiddle a little with that, but that's, I'm working on a different project that's still very much in its earliest stages, in which the culture of the main characters is the result of three cultures having been smashed together. So I'm playing with those. Here's three different original language bases that sort of melted into each other, and that causes a lot of weirdness and
yeah,
rule changes and stuff like that. And I've been playing with that aspect of it, just to try to create just for names and place names and all that, like not even the actual spoken language, to give it a sense of verisimilitude.
yeah. I can see that the Venn diagram of our geekery would be highly overlapping. So do you want to tell us a little bit about some of these language groups that you've created for Maradaine?
Okay.
The ones that, I mean, I'm thinking that you mentioned specifically that three of them occurred in Import of Intrigue, and so I thought, hey, let's go down that road a little bit.
Okay. So, and I even wrote an appendix to Import of Intrigue that is the pronunciation guide for the various terms of the languages that show up. So the first main base is from a country called Fuerga, which is to the east of the Kirin Empire. So they have a language base that got influenced by the Kirins, but not strongly influenced. Their language is filled with a lot more aspirated sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot more things that are like breathy beginnings. And the way I transliterated that is a lot of words begin with HR or HS or things like that. So, so it's like, what are some of the words? If I can look through the book. So instead of just saying what is written with an HR would be like krelta rather than just saying relta or something like that.
So these are when these words appear in the book. Are they names? Are they nouns? Are they what function are they serving in the book?
Mostly it is names. There are a few nouns, especially in the case of Fuergan. Fuergan culture has a lot more complicated familial connections. So, for example, and the main murder victim in the Import of Intrigue is a Fuergan noble.
Okay.
And so when they go to the rest of his family, just defining who he is to them takes like, so, you know, the woman who's essentially the head of the household, when she says that the murder victim was her Isresa, what is that? And she's like, well, it's more than uncle, but less than husband to you. So it's because they have these complicated marriage arrangements that involve multiple people, and they have complicated connections to people based on that. So, and then, you know, and then the other person who's the main person in the household, I'm trying to remember what the term she used for him. Again, it was, you know, less than brother, but more than husband. And
right.
But that was the main use of, and also they have several different ceremonies of mourning. So I had some of the words for that came up. So that was the main use there with that culture.
Cool.
because I didn't want. I mean, I really tried not to like overwhelm this book with foreign words, but even still,
Oh, I totally get that. Yeah.
even still, people were like, "Oh, there's so much." My mother was like, "There's too many weird names, Marshall."
Well, I mean, it's all relative, right?
It is all relative, like.
And you know, I think also sometimes people will have a different attitude on that depending on whether it's an actual world language or not.
True.
Right? I mean, if you read Alia de Baudard's books that are set in the Aztec culture, there are Aztec names just about everywhere constantly, and Aztec names are not simple.
No.
But at the same time, it's an existing world language, so sometimes people can just go with that in a way that they can't go with that if it's a created language.
Right, and I think also in the case of this book, since the point of view characters, it's foreign to them, and I try to make it clear
Right.
that them it's like, okay, I don't understand what that is. I don't know, that it's just weird words to them, and even some of the characters. And I think I drove my copy editor a little nuts with this because I have two of the other inspectors who are working the case with my main characters, who just constantly like mangling things because they don't want to bother to say it right.
Yeah, not an uncommon thing in the world.
Not an uncommon thing at all. So it's like, so I got copy editor notes. They're like, "Is this? Did you make a mistake, or is that it's a mistake?" And
Yeah. Did you make a mistake here, or did your character make a mistake here?
This is what style sheets and notes for editors and copy editors are for. It's kind to make notes of that stuff.
But
there's no good place to put it in production.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy actually. When you make a language, you have to use it consistently through
Right.
the book. So, when I'm in early drafts, I catch lots of places where I've left something out, some mark that was supposed to be there, because of the way that I designed the language. So I imagine you did some of that too.
Oh, at one point, not in these books, but in one of the not in the constabulary books, but in the Thorn books, because the drug that my main character is trying to stop has a foreign origin. Its original name is foreign also, which is effete. And in the book that hasn't come out yet, or maybe it is alchemy. No, okay, it isn't alchemy. I mentioned the name of the plant that is the source of the drug, which was Eptapha. And I spelled in the book, Effete is spelled with a double F and Eptapha is spelled with a single F. And so the production editor was like, "Don't you think they should both be a double F?" I'm like, no, because one is a I forget now exactly the term, because when I'm not looking directly at linguistic information, the fricatives and like goes out of my brain. But like, no, because one is this and one's this, and it's like, okay, this is the geekiest answer I've ever got.
No, because that is just how the language works.
Have you ever changed anything from like that editor where they're like, "Can we just make this look more the same?" Like, have you ever actually gone like, "Yeah, okay, why not?"
Actually, in that case, I did, and then in the next book, when I had a native speaker of that language in the room and somebody pronounced it wrong, he was like, made a point of like, no.
That's funny.
But yeah, so I mean, but yeah, I have like tons of notes of what for each of the language bases, of what the different of the phonemic inventory, and then how my transliteration rules for each of them. So I strive for that level, for the consistency of making it all look right and sound right. Which, when I did the map work, I had to do also, because you can't have, you're going to have all these different cities. They also have to have that same consistency of city names. And that's
Yeah.
the rules. Next question.
Sorry, I'm over here taking notes. Because I have to be able to somehow
Sum this up.
capture
Yeah.
and sum up what you've been saying this whole time.
So
Well, all right, like
I have a question about city names and country names. Where do you start? Do you just say, come up with a word and it sounds nice and you go there from the language, or do you start with the language?
Usually it's with country names, like it starts with just what sounds right and then molding that into like the initial language base that you want it to have. Because I mean, with the country names and a lot of the major city names, those are things I came up with 20 years ago before I ever did proper linguistic work, and then learned that and went, oh, I messed up.
Oh, well, yeah. But so like
Now that I know things, oh, it's all wrong.
I had a similar situation where I had a bunch of different, stuff I'd made up. And I realized, wow, these are all parts of different language systems.
Yes.
But I actually used that to, I basically said, okay, fine. These people are from 3 different language groups and they came together. But what I did was I backformed the history of the world based on these weird things I had done linguistically without even thinking about it.
Exactly. And I have some of that in Druth culture, because again, digging back through the history, I have that there was before the Kieran Empire came in and took over all of what becomes Druthal, there was the native language there, and over the course of Kieran rule, they mostly stamped it out and absorbed some of it, but there were pocket areas where the stamping out didn't quite take as well, and so you have then areas that have a little more linguistic difference, especially in place names. And I mean, how that manifests is while most of Druthal has sort of anglicized language rules in terms of name places, you have places that have more where the rules are a little more French than English, which is just that's how that manifested there. And those are, again, things that I did initially without necessarily thinking about before I understood linguistic rules, and then I'm like, oh, I need to sort of craft that into something that makes sense rather than just I thought it sounded cool.
Because you did think it sounded cool, and it did sound cool. And that's why you didn't want to get rid of it. No, I mean, because I think one of the traps of created languages is over-regularization.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, everything just sounds exactly the same, and it becomes... It's... and I think this is a problem with all forms of world building, where if you only do that little snippet, or you only show that little portion, then that portion becomes the whole thing. And that can become a danger too. And you have that with words, and you have that also with cultural artifacts. The thing that always comes to mind when I think about this stuff is, I presume everyone here is a Star Trek watcher.
On some level, yes, probably.
That's a safe assumption.
Like with the Bajoran people, like when the Bajoran species was first introduced, they mentioned that they had a food called Hasperat. And 7 years later, even though they had done a lot more with Bajor, it seemed like that was the main food they ever ate. It was the only thing. Yeah. Like, we're going to mention Bajoran food. That was the thing you were going to mention. And
well, I mean, it's sort of like the sushi of of Deep Space Nine.
thing that's like, we came up with one thing, and so now that's the thing we'll always mention.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Though I do have to say, like, I mean, the one Japanese food everybody knows about is sushi because it's like sort of like the first thing that came over, and right.
I don't know. See, like teriyaki seems pretty ubiquitous.
Yeah, teriyaki too. So, I mean, it's obviously not just one thing. You really don't want to have just one thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But yeah, you don't want to be too shallow in what you show the world. But then, if you go too deep, then you'll lose some people who are like, why are they telling me the history of grain in this country?
Well, I think though that I think that you've done something smart in having your point of view characters be natives to Maradaine.
Right.
And I think it's interesting that you have them being two different social groups within Maradaine, because that actually adds a sort of another layer of interest and dare I say intrigue. But at the same time, what that allows you to do is play with more of your foreign languages because they're allowed to be more foreign.
Right. They're allowed to be confusing because they're confusing to the characters to a degree. You'll still get some readers who will bounce off that, and that's the danger you always do with fantasy and science fiction in general. Is some people, whatever you do will be a little too weird for them, but the thing that's a little too weird for some people is too mundane for other people, and
right. It's the balance. Yeah.
It is always amusing to me how the same thing in, you'll get one reviewer that'll say like, oh, it's, this completely weird alien foreign thing. And somebody was like, oh, it's this old thing again. Like,
Yeah.
Exact same thing.
Yep. And then you have to, like, when a Romulan ale, you have to track all the imports and when those began. And
Romulan, that's another one of those that's like,
yeah, the one Romulan food we all know.
The whole planet have one ale.
Hey, I have to tell you though that Foster's is not the only beer in Australia.
It's sort of like Scotch, right? Ought to be. It's like, okay, Scotch is from different parts. There's different.
And there's different types
different parts of Scotland.
Actually, I'll tell you a little tidbit about Foster's, though. Foster's is the #1 beer in Australia, but it's only the #1 beer in Australia because it's the #2 beer in every state. And every state's #1 beer is a different beer. So you've got the state's favorite beer, and then Foster's, right? So when you kind of add it all together, Foster's ends up being the #1 beer across the entire place, but yet it's not the #1 beer anywhere.
Wow.
So you do some sneaky stuff with that. Is all I'm saying.
Is it their #1 export beer?
There we go. It certainly is their #1 export beer. So let's see. This is super fun, Marshall, and I enjoy pressing you on the linguistic stuff because you know how it is. I'm just into that. But so, what other things have I missed? Something key about your world building that contributes directly to the plot of an import of Intrigue that you would like to talk about before we end our session?
What that I can think of, because we have the various different cultures, the various different languages, and navigating through all of those is what my main characters have to do to solve the murder, because the murder in question here is whoever the murderer was deliberately designed the murder scene to force the inspectors to have to go and look through all these different cultures. Like they put in elements from a bunch of different colors. Like the knife is from one place, and
Okay,
writing from a different place, and so it's making them essentially do this little mini tour to talk to all these different people and figure out what's really going on behind all this.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And then, so I also then use the those artifacts, like the writing that was with the body comes from the Maradaine culture, who are very structured people, and so that's the writing turned out to be a form of poetry for them. And their language is done with the word logoforms, where it's logoforms. I think I need to be better with my
Are you saying logograms?
logograms. That's the word I wanted. Yes, I've done. Yes, my study of linguistics is entirely amateur, so I forget things.
That's okay.
Never had to take a test. So, each symbol represents a sound, of course, and every one symbol.
Okay.
So is that logograms, or am I?
Logograms are the ones where each symbol represents a concept.
Okay. So it's not like it's the one before logogram, where each symbol represents a whole morpheme rather than a phoneme.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's logograms because if you're talking about logograms are symbols that represent pieces of meaning rather than pieces of sound.
Right. So,
okay.
So it's not log, but it's something. It's not, but it's also.
Well, but morphemes are minimal units of meaning.
They can be, but they're also minimal units of whole sound. So it's like as opposed to would be the phoneme, pho would be the morpheme, where it's a combination of. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway,
that's all right. It's good. It's good.
Symbol represents a morpheme, and if you rotate it 90 degrees, represents a different morpheme.
Mm.
So then any symbol can mean 4 different sounds depending on which way you rotate it. So the thing that's written in their language that the inspectors find is a block of 12 of the symbols, by 4, that is a form of poetry that when you see it in one direction, it works as a line of poetry. And then you turn the whole thing 90 degrees, it works again. You turn the whole thing 90 degrees again, it works. So it creates 4 phrases in one block. That, if you're an excellent poet of this particular art form, then you can do that in a way that each phrase works and each phrase is beautiful. And so.
Yep.
And so that's one of the mysteries they've unlocked, is like, where did this come from? Because when they bring it to the people of that culture, or actually the people of that culture who are very bureaucratic and very controlled, they reach out to the constabulary first, like, we understand. Yes, just like that.
It's a Latin palindrome.
Right. It's the same.
It's a 4-way palindrome.
Yes. It's the same idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're not logograms, but it's fair enough.
But in that, like, if you turned it, then like the sideways A would mean something else, and thus create a different. So when the other culture is like, we understand you have something of ours that you want to ask us questions about, so come ask us questions. And then they show them the poem, and they just weep like this is the most beautiful thing in like, well,
that's fun.
No, we've never seen this before. But then when they translate it into trade, it's like, no, it kind of loses everything. Which was my hanging landscape over the fact that I can't write poetry, so that.
Well, but I mean, to be fair, that's pretty accurate because, like, for example, I studied Japanese poetry, and you just can't do things in English the way that you can do them in Japanese. Like, I mean, we have this concept of what a haiku is, and it's just.
It's a shadow.
What a haiku is in Japanese is just such a graceful, incredible thing. And in English, it's like a sort of fun, quirky little thing.
It's a math problem in English.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, even though you might have been protecting yourself as an author, it's still actually not inaccurate to do that because, translation does steal a lot of the spirit of things anyway. So that's well done. Well done.
when the Lorrainans translate it, they're like, oh, that was terrible. Let's not speak of that again.
That's awesome. Okay, well, so we've got 2 more minutes, and any additional questions or thoughts?
Anyone?
Well, I just I'm sort of it's interesting when we're talking about like naming countries and cities because I have a book I'm going to be editing, and I wrote the whole thing, and I never came up with the name for the city or the country. So I sort of get to work backwards. And I've been thinking that I need to French this up because the whole thing revolves around fashion, and so I'm using like haute couture and stuff. So I'm like, well, why not just, and I can do like the same for like the names of the week. I can just maybe tweak the French names for the names of the week. And so now it's like if I'm working backwards, then maybe I can come up with like a sort of Frenchy sounding city in a Frenchy sounding country.
Well, if you, like I was talking back then about making a phonemic inventory, you could do essentially the same thing of just go and grab the phonetic inventory of French, which is, you just Google that, and then use that as your language base to start out with.
That's awesome, because I did not know those phonetic inventory things existed. Like,
oh yeah,
why don't we know these?
You could actually probably Google the phonemic inventory of French.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I went to art school, man. Come on, you're like, I don't know these things.
And put the name of it in the chat bar for you.
Excellent.
Okay. Phonemic. Okay. Oopsie. I had phonetic.
Yeah. It is actually a distinction that might cause you trouble if you were to use Google. So that's why.
Yeah. Okay.
You have the right one.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So your book is out, right?
Yes. Import of Intrigue is in stores. Came out November 1st. So.
Okay.
Yay.
So go buy it, everybody.
Buy the first book, so then reading the second book makes sense.
So does it stand alone, Marshall, the Import of Intrigue?
In terms of like that, it's its own story. Like there is a thing to solve, and things happen, and at the end they have a resolution of what they have to solve. Yes, it's its own story. But since it's the continuation of the character story, if you haven't read the first book and don't know the characters, then I do my best to reintroduce them, but certainly one can be like, who are these people? Why do we care?
Yeah, that's certainly true.
But yeah, each book of both series that is it is its own distinct story and has a hopefully satisfying conclusion that like there, I read a good story, and I would like to read the next one.
Very, very cool. So thank you so much for coming and talking with us about the book, and especially for being flexible when our previous planning sort of went out the window really at the last minute. So it was nice to have you back. You're welcome to attend Hangouts anytime.
Thank you.
And let's see, next week we're going to talk about in-groups and how people linguistically and behaviorally mark in-groups.
Cool.
With things like nicknames and secret handshakes and that kind of stuff.
Oh.
So, woohoo! Hope everyone can join us, and I will now stop the broadcast. Thanks again, Marshall.
Thank you so much.